What's your most shocking toxic workplace story? I worked for Asda in Gosforth, Newcastle. I was hired as point of sale, all the promotional signs in the shop, and trained by the Kath who'd been doing it 20 plus years as she was moving up to personnel. Long story short, she never showed half the stuff she was supposed to, like how to order the signs, how to dispose of the old signs, and so on. Add to that, the store's deputy manager, Stave McKenna, naming and shaming the E, decided to add to my duties, making me do all the recycling on a Sunday. The whole superstore's recycling that was supposed to be done daily but was left all week. I was allocated 2 hours for this. Then, on top of my normal duties, I was given the price integrity job. So every day I got given a list of anywhere from 300 price changes and had to go around the entire shop and make sure they were changed. I was given 1 hour to do this, on top of all point of sale stuff too. Christmas Day, I ended up in the local walk-in center with chest pains. More on that later. Boxing Day, I was in at 6 a.m. to change the Christmas signs for spring cleaning and exercise ones. When I got in, I was given a list, a pricing gun, and a printer. Apparently, the lad who usually did the price changes was sacked, so I was to change 3,000 prices on top of changing the entire shop from the Christmas design. Obviously, there was no way I could do both, but management tried to make me, and of course, I wasn't allowed to go over my hours either. Not that I wanted to. The final straw came a month or so later when I had just put up all the Valentine's Day promotions, Chinese New Year promotions, and the usual store offers. Remember every single sign, poster, bollard cover, flag, cardboard insert, and the like for every single aisle in front of store needed doing. Then, that McKenna gave me a list of 200 price integrity checks to do. I finished all the displays and my shift had ended, and I hadn't even started the price integrity yet. I rang upstairs to see what he wanted me to do, and he started shouting at me for not getting it done. He then said, "So what have you been doing all shift?" It was a 4-hour shift, 4 ducking hours. I was fuming. I told him what I'd done, and he responded with, "Is that it?" I snapped and basically told him to go duck himself without the swearing, and went home. I had a panic attack on the way home, chest pains, shaking, crying, etc. I was stressed beyond belief. Turns out the chest pains were a result of deep depression and anxiety. I ended up being signed off sick for 6 weeks. The day after it all happened, and I rang in sick, spoke to personnel, told them what had happened and who was to blame, I get a phone call off McKenna, illegal by the way, defending himself, saying I'd taken things the wrong way and asking me to come back in. I said no and hung up. How did he know he was mentioned in confidential phone call to personnel? The next step, around 2 weeks later, was to meet with the company nurses to be evaluated and see if they agreed with the doctor's diagnosis. I was like a shaking leaf. Happened every time I went near the shop. Thankfully, they listened to everything and agreed completely with the doctor. They were horrified by what I told them, especially when I mentioned the price integrity. Turns out that was the responsibility of the deputy manager, aka that McKenna. He was in deep crap after being found out. During the meeting, the nurse got up and opened the door. There was Kath listening at the door, caught red-handed listening into a report to her friend. The nurse was fuming, signed me off for 8 weeks, and have zero contact with McKenna. On my return to work interview, I was offered a different job, checkouts and portering. That had nothing to do with him, I agreed. Came back to work with that understanding. My first day back for till training, I get a message that McKenna wanted me to go do the recycling. Told the messenger no, I'm here for till training only and to get someone else. He was moved on to a different store a week later. Meanwhile, I suffered depression and anxiety for 5 years, had to have therapy, and was heavily medicated. For added context, I'm a 6 feet 1 inch tall man who until 3 months prior had been a teacher, left as couldn't find full-time employment, only substitute work. Story 2. A few years ago, an individual that worked at my company was undergoing cancer treatment and was off work for several months. When Christmas rolled around, everyone was awarded customary $50 voucher. The individual with cancer was not because of his sickness record. It's a very big organization, global, so it was thought that maybe he just missed out because of the system. But when HR were approached, they dug their heels in and said, no, rules are rules. Story 3. In my last job, my mom got ill and died very suddenly. I had taken 2 days off and asked for a third, as it was likely she was going to die on that day. My family had gone to bits, could not cope with the end stage, so it just left me. My boss said I was only allowed 2 days as I was still in a probationary period and that there was nothing I could do anyway if it was terminal. I took an extra day anyway. She died as I expected, and I came back to my contract not being renewed, having had 3 days off in total. Apparently, these 3 days somehow counted as more, because I was only 3 days a week. I have never wished ill on someone before, but I really hope someone ends up calling this guy out. He was such a bully, but had the backing of everyone above him. Story 4. I was working in a small business doing project management, and around March of last year, I started having some medical issues, which resulted in a trip to AE. I spoke to the CEO shortly after I came back and said that I'd like to work from home until the issue was resolved because I couldn't be in a vehicle for more than 5 minutes without projectile vomiting. Note here that my job was more than capable of being done from home. She said no, okay, fine. I was off sick for the rest of the day as I'd missed most of the workday in hospital, so I had an emergency appointment. This was originally to get more medication that had been prescribed at the hospital because they'd only prescribed a few days worth of each medication. But whilst I was there complaining about having to go into the office despite being so ill, so the doctor said that she'd write me a fit note saying I couldn't go into the office and had to work from home as reasonable accommodation, otherwise I'd have to take long-term sick leave. So I thought this was all sorted. I submitted the fit note to our HR and informed my team that I was going to be for the foreseeable future. The CEO took this personally, and she started piling more and more tasks on me, each one of course being urgent. Eventually, after a couple of weeks of working unpaid overtime to keep on top of everything, I complained and said that my workload was too much and I couldn't keep up. And she said in a very snarky tone that since I was in the UFC, I should be able to keep up without any trouble. Then, when I said that my capacity for work didn't change based on my environment, she said, quote, "Then I guess I should be expecting you in the office full-time from tomorrow." I explained that I could barely leave the house and had a fit note from the doctor, to which she said, "I'm pretty sure doctors prescribe medication, not environment," which I think might be the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but I digress. Fast forward 2 months. My medical issue still hasn't been resolved due to the NHS ducking up my specialist referral. I feel worse than ever, but have been working from home. The CEO couldn't force me in because I covered my arise with documentation from the doctor and specialists. I get called into a meeting with our internal HR and a consultant, and they explain to me that I'm being made redundant because the company is struggling and blah, blah, blah. After that meeting, the CEO calls me and says, "I'm sorry that we're having to let you go, but times are tough and you aren't showing up when we need you." I ask if this is about the WFH, but she denies and claims business reasons. Her wording and tone tell me it's about the WFH. I got retaliated against for being ill by losing my job with no severance and had about 4 days notice when my last day would be. And then a week later, I saw my old job advertised. So I know it was retaliation against a perceived slight to her authority. Before anyone points it out, I know that what they did by rehiring is illegal, but between getting surgery and getting accepted onto a course, I didn't have the time or money to pursue it. Not that I wish I had, but luckily it all worked out for me. Story 5. My dad worked at my uncle's engineering plant for 40-odd years since 1970, not long after he emigrated from India. Was one of the hardest working and experienced hands there, and generally was quite beloved and respected by everyone there. I remember going to the factory a lot as a kid and having a blast in the shipyard playing football with my cousins whilst my dad worked. My uncle also would get us ice cream and let us watch TV in his office when he went out. You could just tell it was a good place to work. My uncle was a very good man who looked after my dad a lot, and they were good close friends too, as well as brothers-in-law. But sadly, my uncle passed away in 2003. That's when things went to crap as his son, who was a complete ducking a hole, only motivated by money and nothing else, took over the factory. He had no respect for those who had broken their backs, making that business the success it was, my dad included, and those who had shown a lot of loyalty to my uncle and the plant. He made it clear that he wanted my dad to take early retirement so he could bring in younger workers and was trying to phase him out. My dad was still relatively fit for his age and had a good work rate, and it was basically age discrimination. Fortunately, many of his colleagues went to bat for him, and the son eventually backed off. They made it clear that if this was how they were going to treat those who had shown loyalty and busted their asses for that place, then they would all walk. My dad also threatened to go to a lawyer, which got him to back off too. Dad eventually retired in 2012, and as a duck, the son retired 5 years later than he could have, albeit he dropped down to part-time for a large part of that 5 years. The company never brought any kind of leaving gift for my dad from their coffers, nor for any of the old experienced hands like my dad who had moved on. No watch, nothing as a thank you for so many hard years of work. Eventually, those who were still there that had worked with my dad for years, many of them had either left or sadly passed away, did a whip round and brought my dad a watch. They also threw him a small shindig in the factory when the son was not there, which he was apparently fuming about when he found out. My dad, when he got home after his final shift, was crying and emotional, not because of how he was treated, but because it reminded him how much he missed my uncle, and thought he would be ashamed to see how his son treated everyone who had worked so hard, so that his son could even have the opportunity to one day inherit the business in the first place. My uncle would always come down from the office and make time to catch up with everyone, regardless of how busy he may have been. The son rarely ever came down from his office, and when he did, it was usually to Karen about something. That was the difference between the two. When I saw Horrible Bosses, the Colin Farrell, Jason Sudeikis story, reminded me a lot of my dad's situation at work for some reason. Story 6. Before COVID, I was head chef of a successful restaurant that unfortunately lost its venue right at the start of the pandemic. I believed in the company and took a big pay cut and risked quite a lot to stay with the directors to help set up a takeout and plan for a new restaurant post-COVID. After a long time, we did it, mostly myself, doing the hard work and working a lot of unpaid overtime, which was justified because the directors said each 8-10 hours extra I worked, I gained a holiday day on top of my contracted 28. Around the same time, my dad got cancer, and a few months in, we found out it was terminal. I approached my bosses and asked if I could work 1 day less per week for the period of his illness to spend with him, and offered to take a 1/5 pay cut for the duration. They verbally agreed. And then the following week, I came in and signed a new contract with that agreed wage. Only I noticed the schedule for work had the same number of days and hours. I confronted them, and they said after I signed the contract, they realized they couldn't make the rota work as they couldn't afford to hire anybody else to cover that day, even though they were paying themselves both a salary and dividends, but weren't willing to work 1 day a week for the 3-month period leading up to my dad's death. So I said I expected to get my previous salary rate. They said they could no longer afford it and refused. Fast forward to when my dad dies. I get the call that he's on the way out and spend almost 3 days in hospital with him before it happens, where I was supposed to be scheduled to work, then come back and put in a request to have time off until my accrued holiday runs out. I hadn't taken any holidays for the 12 months prior and was owed for the extra holiday days for my unpaid overtime. So I worked out I was owed close to 2 months off. I get told that due to my contract being re-signed, I lost all my holidays from before, even though they never cashed them out for me. I had only accrued 7 days for the 3 months worked, but 3 of them had to be taken for when I was in hospital with my dad. So I was allowed 4 days paid time off. I quit very shortly after. I would have quit much earlier, but the stress of losing a parent is a bit much to juggle whilst job hunting. They're out of business now. Dave and Lauren, go duck yourself. Story 7. I worked for a big hydraulics firm for about 8 years. I dragged myself up the ladder from a fitting picker, rock bottom, to a production planner, planning production and scheduling times, etc. But due to the nature of the company, we were constantly short-staffed in every department, warehouse and office. Because I'd done nearly every job there, I was happy to volunteer to cover other depths whilst juggling my own work. Overtime was never an issue. Staff that went the extra mile were nearly always given extra hours on top of any overtime they did, giving us extra cash. Then there was a change in management. The company was bought over and overtime was stopped, but our targets remained the same. Productivity ground to a halt, and management decided the best course of action was to start with disciplinary action on those that couldn't complete their work on time. I was expected to stay late and work for free, covering other departments as I previously did. Needless to say, I declined and went home. I remember coming in the following day to a written warning on my deck as I wasn't being a team player. I took this to management asking for an explanation, and the outcome was basically, "You're not here when we need you to be." I explained that I'm not paid nearly enough to stay for unexpected hours. If you want me to stay, I need overtime pay. They said the warning would stand. Fine. This happened on 2 more occasions, as I kept declining to work for free. Each time I kept the written warning, which conveniently had management logos, names, dates, and times, all printed on headed paper and signed off. I was then called into the office for a sit-down with 2 managers, which was essentially a 20-min roasting and "you'll lose your job if you don't do as you're told" meeting. Again, signed off on paper. Went back to my computer and saved the next 4 months of planned work schedules into a USB, downloaded the company's customer list, everyone we'd ever sold to, including lists of what they'd bought, printed off my immediate notice and wiped my desktop, files, everything back to bare bones, deleted about 3 years worth of files only I had access to, and handed my immediate notice into management. I took every warning, email, and correspondence I had and emailed them to the head office, stating why I had left, the kind of treatment I and other employees had endured at the change of management, and that I would be sending this to a solicitor. 2 members of senior management lost their jobs, and 2 received demotion. I received a fairly decent settlement to keep solicitors out of it. They wanted the USB as part of that deal, and was offered my old job back for a little more money and overtime. Story 8. I used to work in this place that was like something out of a film. The toxicity was off the charts. Some charming examples. CEO, who was appointed by the board, was a nuttery. 1 minute you were his favorite, the next you were being made redundant or given a final written warning for things like not saying hello in the morning. We had a dishwasher in the kitchen, and one day the office manager announced a dishwasher use policy that required a bit of paper to be filled in for every dish being put in the dishwasher. The CEO suddenly announced an emotional regulation policy. Anyone found to be unhappy at work was subject to disciplinary proceedings. This was dropped when a lawyer acting on behalf of a colleague threatened court action and public ridicule. We often had to go away for events. During one of these trips, I was subjected to a verbal assault in front of clients from another colleague. Line manager was useless. CEO just laughed and said, "That's what she's like." During another trip, the event manager tried to get keys for everyone's rooms since the company paid for the room, so I have the right to go into them anytime I like. I told her that if she even attempted it, she'd be dealt with as an intruder, which might result in an iron to the face. A girl in another team was the girlfriend of a fairly prominent footballer. Comments were made daily by a number of men about her appearance. When she complained, Kier told her to just don't be a wag then. My line manager plotted to get rid of me. I found his documentation sitting on the printer. One of their gotchas was that I was a bit down since my mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. His memo proposed we use this at the right time for maximum impact. I'm a bisexual man, which I've never hid. When new males joined the team, they would be told to watch out for me. On one occasion, I formed a particularly close friendship with a guy who came to work with us, who was totally straight. We were then both subject to a sustained campaign of rumors and conjecture about the nature of our friendship. We moved to a new office, and all of the meeting rooms had those conference phones in them. After about 6 months, I discovered they were set to record all conversations in the room, with the recordings being put on a secret share on our server so the CEO could listen to them. I have my own business now, and I've gone out of my way to build a culture and environment where there's no toxicity, and I stamp it out the instant I suspect it's developing. Story 9. My first job in a call center. My team leader was a pig. All management were related, if not by blood, but friendship. The finance manager was the director's sister. The sales director was the sister's fiancé. My team leader was the fiancé's best friend, etc. I was the only female on an otherwise entirely male sales team of 10. My highlights were, my team leader decided to boost morale by sending out an email listing his team members' best qualities. All the boys got things like great focus, boosts morale, excellent teamwork, great arise. I was mugged on the way to work when I arrived, untreatably shook up. He gave me a brew, 10 minutes to compose myself, and then said I had to wait until I finished work to log the police report as I was now on work time, and I had to work 10 minutes of my lunch due to starting my actual work late. In front of my whole team, he announced that he was going to have to start writing me up if I kept insisting on wearing work attire. Better that didn't show off my figure better. He held a team meeting where, for no reason, he announced that I would probably be so much fitter if I didn't have such a big nose, then asked the remainder of the team if they agreed. When I ended up in tears during the above meeting for his comments, he then insisted I had to compose myself and, when I was ready, stand up in the meeting and apologies to the team for making them feel uncomfortable by getting so unnecessarily upset. Being 22 in my first big girl job, I didn't know any better and accepted the behavior until my dad realized I was constantly upset coming home and asked. He made me report it to management. Remember how I said that all management were connected? Well, I reported him and the behavior on a Friday. I came in the following Monday and my login wouldn't work. My team leader played dumb and said he would log it with it. I sat there for 90 minutes before the director pulled me into the office, said they were downsizing my team by one, and there was nowhere else to put me, before escorting me off the premises. I had to wait in my car for another couple of hours until my colleague got his lunch break so he could bring my belongings to me, as they wouldn't let me back in the office to collect my bag or coat. Story 10. I don't know if other people would find this shocking, but I did. I worked in an environment where all the women, there were almost no men who worked there, looked a certain way. It was a fashion retailer, and nearly all the female staff had blonde hair, very highly styled every day, a full face of makeup, incredibly girly outfits, low-cut tops, very short skirts, long red nails, high heels, and very slim figures. There was no subject spoken of as much as that of dieting, and I remember the manager once telling me, a very young girl at the time, that she knew when she'd got to her desired weight, because that's when her periods stopped. Anyhow, I have no idea why they employed me, apart from my talent for styling customers, that is. Please excuse my lack of modesty, but I was good. I must have been at least 4 taller than the tallest other woman there. My feet were far bigger, and I didn't wear high heels. My fashion sense was less high street and more subtle designer. At the time, a totally different, nowhere near so girly look. My makeup was subtle, my hair was brown, and in a bob. I was a UK size 14-16, about a USA size 12 size. I had no interest in dieting. I think I looked feminine and stylish. One evening, we all had to stay, whether we liked it or not, very late after work to finish the stock count. At the end of the session, one of the managers approached me and asked me to walk her to her car. None of us could get parked near to the store, and this lady was going to have to walk alone after dark to pick up her vehicle. She was scared of being abused, as the neighborhood could be a bit rough after dark. I explained that, by the sound of where she had said that she had parked, she wouldn't be able to easily drop me back at my car afterwards. She assured me that she certainly wasn't intending to drop me back at my car. I should walk back to my car. I told her that meant I would have to walk much further on my own in the dark to get to my car. She shrugged. I asked, "What about me? Getting abused?" She looked me up and down with 100% honest surprise. "Well, you don't need to worry about anything like that," she said. Afterwards, when I had angrily refused, almost all those effing women in that store treated me as if I was the arsehole because I was too selfish to help Janet avoid getting abused. Story 11. My colleague's sister passed unexpectedly just before the run-up to Christmas, which was our busiest time of year. He was a vital cog in the team, but we all understood that he needed some time and that we would have to pick up the slack. Apart from the owners, who put a lot of pressure on him to come back straight away and even phoned him on the day of the funeral to ask when they could expect him in the office. He quit on the spot. It was all so unnecessary. It was a struggle without him, but we were managing. They could have just given him a few days. Story 12. I used to work in a language school with a guy I'll call S, who was a bit of an oddball, but otherwise all right, and nobody had problems with him personally, but he just couldn't get his act together and was always messing up. However, the manager was really lenient and kept covering for him and giving him chance after chance. I think she felt a bit sorry for him. Unfortunately, one day he messes up in a big way that causes problems for our students and his whole class complains. I take over his class and he's given another one. My manager informed him that his contract would not be renewed when it ran out, but he had several months to get another job sorted out. A new lady, who I'll refer to as Kay, is brought on not long after, and it's fairly obvious she's being brought on and trained up to replace S when he's let go. Kay is lovely to everyone, but S just acts like an absolute arsehole, to Kay making snide remarks about everything she does. One day, S barges into Kay's classroom and yells at her while she's teaching a class. He then storms into the staff room in a huff. I ask what the hell is the matter, and S says Kay had taken his CD player to use in her class. We use CD players to do listening tests and activities in our classrooms. I ask why he didn't merely get one of the many other CD players from one of the other empty classrooms. S explodes saying, because that's what Kay wants, me running backwards and forwards like an idiot, and how apparently Kay is right up the manager's eyes. At the moment, our normally cheerful and friendly manager comes in and says in an ice cold voice, "My office now." They both go in, and I hear a heated discussion between the two. S comes out of my manager's office and starts emptying his drawer in the staff room, then proceeds to begin ripping apart his books in a tantrum. He'd been fired there and then and told to leave the building. Only after he'd left did Kay come in, and she was in tears. The idiot flushed several months of guaranteed work and income down the toilet and erased any remaining goodwill for him because of his toxic attitude and being angry at the wrong person for his contract not being renewed. Story 13. I worked for a jeweler business doing marketing. The owners were a married couple, the husband was the designer and had broken English, and did all the creative stuff. The wife did all the admin side. The wife had breast cancer and wasn't in so much. In total, there were 6 of us, including the owners. I recall them having a shouting match in the warehouse, and we could hear everything. It turned out he had cheated on her. She called him out in it, and his response was, "I wouldn't need to go and get BJ if you did sex more." She replies that she had cancer and called him a 2, which he stated that having cancer wasn't an excuse to not do your womanly duties. As a manager, I ushered the other staff out and gave them cash to get coffees and stayed myself in the office, just in case things took a bad turn and to support the wife if she needed. Female owner never came back to office after, and they divorced. Male owner then turned his gaze to my female colleagues, forcing them to stay late, asking them to come in on Saturdays where it would just be 2 of them, propositioning them for sex often, etc. He was a predator, and I did my best to protect everyone, usually coming in on my days off to be present when he called them in or staying late, etc. I wrote crap-hot references for them, assisted with their CVSs, and they all found jobs. I rehired new staff, people who just needed to get their foot in the door to somewhere like coming off maternity with part-time hours, so it wouldn't affect their benefits, etc. Limiting exposure to idiot, and remained in post long enough to find other jobs after 6 months. He was always a horrible man, but I guess the wife just kept him in check until she couldn't anymore. I did eventually leave, resigning whilst the owner was in India getting his jeweler manufactured during his long stints out there. The whole office was closed for about 3 months, as we all ducked off at the same time pretty much. I think he just does Etsy now, not B2B. Story 14. I used to work for a major high street retail chain, one that has a very popular sale at Christmas. I was one of the more senior members in the delivery team and was in charge when my manager was not on shift. Not that I got any extra for it. The hours they make you work in the run-up to that to prepare for it are ridiculous. Another member of staff had basically been forced to come in despite being unwell. Turns out she had the start of flu. I had worked closely with her. Guess who caught her flu? And also a bacterial infection on top of it? It came on quite quickly, and I had been to the doctor as I didn't realize it was that serious. But my manger wouldn't accept I was ill without a doctor's note, despite it not being over a week. Thankfully, the doctor was kind enough to sign me off work for 2 weeks, which meant I was off over the sale period. I was so unwell, but my manager was not happy and rang me every day for the rest of that 2-week period to ask when I would be back in. Skip to the last day of the 2-week period, and I get another phone call from my manager to tell me they'd assigned me 2 weeks annual leave to start tomorrow, the day I was due back. So I ended up being off for a month, during which time a temp job came up at the bank my dad worked for, which I got. When I went back after my annual leave, I handed my notice in. I'd worked there for 2.5 years, and come my last shift, I was rostered on a loan, doing replenishment, and I didn't even get a leaving card or present. There was nobody there to say bye, nothing. I literally just walked out the door. It's absolutely crap working in retail. I've got other stories of awful working conditions there as well. Thankfully, that bank job worked out, and I'm still there nearly 13 years later. I still go in that shop on occasion, and I see people who worked there when I did who are still working there, and I have no idea how they've been there so long. Story 15. My dad was a corporal in the RAF in the 1990s when my elder brother ran into the road and was killed by a car on military quarters. I was 2 at the time. Initially, they were good to him until the funeral. But this wore off, and my dad went into work and hardly spoke to anyone because he had become depressed due to shock. Military doctors dismissed it as just temporary and put him on reduced duties, not time off, for a month and didn't even refer him to a bereavement specialist. My mother was even worse, and even today has still not really got over it. Then, newer people got posted and who knew nothing of my dad's past. They started calling him lazy and useless and gave him a nickname for talking quietly. When he complained, senior bosses told him it was just banter and to not be so oversensitive. They then volunteered him as a reserve for a royal family funeral guard. At this point, my dad said no. They ignored my brother's death reason and actually told him again to man up, and was told on no uncertain terms this would reflect in his annual appraisal, and his chances for promotion would be reduced. An officer said he was the worst sorry excuse for an individual he had ever met for saying no to this wonderful opportunity. He never did get promoted after that. He had a mental breakdown soon after whilst working. Knowing he had to work as he had no one to turn to for advice, he then stuck it out for another 12 years, being treated the same at other places he got posted to. He had just given up trying by that point, just to get a decent pension for our family. He wrote all this in a diary that he kept hoping it would any other family members going through what he had put up with. I certainly have no interest after reading what happened, and my son has read it, and he too feels the same way. We did try and find out what was written that denied him getting a promotion, but was told the officer had put a restriction on us accessing the records for those years. Story 16. This was around 5 years ago, following a terror attack in a Middle Eastern country, I can't remember which. It was all over the news, including the TV in the break room. Guy comes in and says something along the lines of, "Should have lost all of the," incredibly slur here, and walked out of the room. I looked around at the other people to confirm I heard what I thought I heard. All the other employees in the room looked as shocked as I did, reported him to the manager. Manager wouldn't do anything because nobody else was willing to verify the accusation. He did, however, pull the employee into the office to explain that he'd been accused, read, to tell him to be careful in future because he didn't want to deal with it. He then went back into the warehouse and moaned about how the report must have come from the only non-white person who worked there, Indian. As though it's relevant, let's call him Dave for the sake of the story. Lovely fella. He then went around asking people to tell the manager that Dave had falsely reported him. A couple of other people agreed and went with them to the manager to make this accusation. The manager then pulled Dave into the office and threatened to fire him for the false report that I made an hour earlier. Dave had entered the building to start his shift approximately 30 seconds before he was pulled in by the manager. I confronted the manager because I knew Dave hadn't made the report. I had, and Dave hadn't even started his shift, and that this had effectively confirmed my report. I may have insulted the manager in the process, but can you blame me? I was told to collect my things and leave. I was leaving anyway. Screw that place. Very much a "you can't fire me, I quit" moment. Dave walked out right alongside me. It was the last straw for him as well. Joke's on them. Me and Dave were the only people who ever actually got any work done. Sadly, I lost contact with Dave after I lost my phone. I still consider him a friend, hoping I run into him one day. Story 17. Got fired from my job working for Sports Direct. It was called the Donny store back then. After punching my boss when I was 18. They had this ridiculous expectation that you were supposed to come in 30 minutes before your shift started, and that you were supposed to stay and finish your work even after your official finishing time. If the store wasn't tidy by 5 p.m., they'd expect you to stay to 6 p.m. unpaid to make sure it was tidy. From day one, I refused, Duck that. If I'm working, I want paid. They didn't like it one bit and would make remarks, but I ignored because I knew I wouldn't be there long. It was a summer job before college. One morning, I was due to start at 10 a.m. I was in the staff room at 9:45 a.m. relaxing before the shift. My manager came in and started giving the team briefing for the day. He was about 25, 30 years old and obviously angry. He was still working a crafty job at that age and would always have a crafty attitude to staff. I had told him to duck off several weeks before for making crafty remarks to me. I might only have been 18, but I boxed as a kid and trained regularly. I had my earphones in and he came over, literally ripped them out my ears and grabbed my t-shirt. He shouted at me, something along the lines of, "When he speaks, I should listen." In a heartbeat, I stood up and threw a peach of a left hook. His head spun and he dropped like a sack of crap. The other manager was in utter shock and said he was calling the police, and I said, "No problem. There's a room full of witnesses saying he put hands on me first." He didn't call the police. The other guy was back up by this point and left the room. I was told it was best if I went home. I didn't go back as I was a couple weeks away from starting college anyway. Got a letter through saying I'd been sacked for failing to turn up. Worth. Story 18. Worked there during university holidays when and then briefly full-time after I graduated. Second in command was in his 30s. I was 19. He told me one day, in front of the whole office, he bought his girlfriend a dress I often wore to work so he could have sex with her in it and pretend it was me. The boss, who was friends with my parents, found it hilarious. Same man told clients on the phone after I'd put them through to him that he wanted to shag the 19-year-old administrator, who answered the phone. Uniforms were introduced. Company polo shirt, short black skirt, and heels. We were entirely phone-based. No clients came to see us. Boss would comment on our skirts not being short enough or our heels being too low. There's more, but that gives the gist of what that company was like. Story 19. I worked for a gas and electricity marketing company back when there was a free-for-all of companies trying to sign customers up to the supplier they represented. During my training, one of my mentors, who was a slimy, jumped-up, God's gift to women type of, asked me to do the spiel myself and close the deal. I did exactly that. The women signed up for both gas and electricity supply from us, and I felt I'd achieved something. Little did I know he'd added the contract information to his tally rather than mine. Come payday, I realized I was a fair chunk of change short in my pay packet and took it up with the area manager. He was their top earner, so she was automatically on his side, but I persevered amidst claims of, "Are you sure it was yours?" from the AM and, "Do you really think you'd have got that if I hadn't schooled you?" from my mentor. I got the commission as I wouldn't back down. My wife will tell you I'm a stubborn, but the area manager wasn't happy. A couple of years after I left the company, my mentor came to my doorstep trying to sign people up for a different company. My wife, then GF, answered the door, and as soon as he started the hard sell with her, she said, "You'd better speak to my other half," as she knew I'd worked in this field. His face was a picture. He tried the, "Good to see you. How have you been?" bollocks, then proceeded with his spiel and how it would be doing him a favor. When he asked if I'd be interested, I just said, "For you? Damn no," and shut the door in his smug face. Other things I saw during this training period were another salesman signing up a woman who had a prepayment meter, we weren't allowed to, and promising her new payment card would be in the post, it wouldn't be, leaving her potentially without electricity, and a chap who would just talk at the customers incessantly until they signed the contract to get rid of him. Story 20. Mine, witness a married friend of mine, who was also my friend of my wife's friends, cheating on her husband on night shift. She knew I saw. Someone else did and spread rumors. She started to lose her mind with the fun on nights and said inappropriate things to me. I let her know I wasn't interested. She then began gaslighting that I was in her personal business in order to make a false harassment complaint. Fortunately, some of her flirty messages were sent to my wife by mistake, and my wife was tracking. My marriage got stronger over time as a result. This cheating psycho after tried to threaten to make a false police report. Whether she did or not, I don't know or care. 3 people I did not expect stood up for me from her department, but 3 of the supervisors who coerce, seduce women, and exploit them to the next, their bro code, made up lies and gathered false statements about me. 8 weeks later, managed to get me fired. Well, I quit mid-investigation. 2.5 years later, the truth is out and the karma unfolds. I was the harassed one, technically, and lied about was the retaliation. The 8 weeks before I left that place, I attempted to pass, and never seen anything like it before or since. The toxicity was to pressure, force, and inappropriate pressure on both men and some women to men. It brought a lot of cover-up lies and nasty things people could do to be the one not to appear doing these things. Random substances tests weren't random. Supervisors would find out about a woman's past, pressure with long hours, and get favors for substances they left a decade before. Speak evil into their marriages and make work feel a safe home, then come in for the kill. One I witnessed is a possible assault. This hits me every day because it won't mean nothing to report it, as this woman is brainwashed into the job culture and rewarded after being pressured and scared to lose her job. I'm at a loss in my mind. Story 21. December last year on my small two-person team, they let the other person be off for most of the month, like maybe they were in 1 day a week. At the time, I didn't think much of this, but I worked in a utilities company and the government energy grant was being rolled out. This unfortunately ramped the workload up so much, but I straight up refused to do overtime due to past treatment there. Bit of backstory, I had 2 serious accidents in the 5 YRs there, car crash and TBI. So I'm a bit on the quiet side and sometimes cry a lot. So I worked like a dog to be finished each day on time to go home and get out of there. Working like that caused a bit of burnout, and by the time the Xmas dinner rolled around and the debt was leaving half day, I went to my car to drive to the party and had the worst panic attack and ended up not being able to go. Still remember the reason being knowing the amount of work I was just leaving behind and having to come back to. Next day I was in work, got pulled to the side, explained what happened, and got told if I had left even 10 minutes earlier, I would have been put down as being sick. They then started trying to give me more work after this. Another DEPS backlog. I pushed back and in my PPRLage rubbish got told I was a bad worker, inflexible, people didn't want to talk to me, and I had a bad memory. I quit with no notice, but gave them the option to meet up and talk. Real dumb, I know. And I got told by them that this was a total shock, out of the blue, and I was the loveliest person, always bringing in things for the debt. This was like a slap to the face, and I'm happy I left. Story 22. I used to work in the contact center for a credit card company. While it wasn't necessarily toxic management, definitely all had brains where they sit. They forced us back into office as soon as COVID restrictions were lifted, but had a rule that if you worked 5-day weeks, you had to work 2 days in office 1 week, then 3 the next, and carry on alternating like this. Oh, and you had to change your in-office days every month. Mind you, this was a 1-hour commute each way for me, so I had absolutely no chance of forming a decent sleep schedule. The work I was doing was primarily concerned with the security of our cards. Throughout my 2.5 years there, I made multiple suggestions on how we could try and stay ahead of the curve and prevent security issues. I was ignored on every single one of them, right up until about a month before I quit. They eventually did create a digital suggestion box where you could track your ideas in real time. I eagerly submitted my suggestions in the hopes that maybe this time they would care. They did, and my ideas saved them more than my annual salary in the space of a week. Then a week later, they announced that we were too expensive, so they were outsourcing us to Mumbai. After all those years of being forced into the office at ridiculous times, my physical presence didn't matter, since the work could easily be done from the other side of the planet. After all my money-saving suggestions they ignored until the last minute, they decided we were too expensive. I turned in my notice the day after they announced the outsourcing. Most illogical people I've ever met complained openly about staff and belittled medical issues quite a bit too, mine and those of my colleagues. Story 23. I don't really have just one story, but my last command in the US Navy was wildly toxic. The senior chief running the Command Death Prevention program gave a training one time and said, if you're sad or feel like nobody cares about you, you're a liar and nobody likes liars. Put on your big boy or big girl pants and get over it. Senior Sailor of the Year, huge honor, was cheating on his wife with one of the civilian contractors on her oven uniform. Nothing happened to him. The contractor got fired for time card fraud. Sailor was accused of harassment, absolutely guilty. But the Command Master Chief, senior enlisted leader, brought up race during his discipline review board. There was an investigation into that mess that concluded that her comment wasn't meant in a discriminatory way. I was shoved into a wall during an argument with another sailor who outranked me. Command threw me under the bus to protect him. Reservist captain sleeping with a junior sailor. A different CMC caught sleeping with a chief. A senior chief caught a DU, took out the front row of an Audi dealership and was allowed to skate through until he retired a few months later. Story 24. I used to work somewhere where I was the only female. I was single. I didn't want to date. Wasn't interested in dating. Someone took my picture and threatened to make a profile on a dating website for me to get me to date, and it would be funny and obviously put things I would never say that were too flirty or make me look easy. I never found out if they actually did, but they said they were going to. Everyone just laughed. Story 25. Not a single story, but a bunch of anecdotes that add up to a pretty toxic company. This is a company I left a couple of years ago, but I still know people who work there and nothing has changed. Some stories I've heard, I was very lucky to not be personally impacted. A colleague told her manager she was pregnant. The manager, also female, told the head of the team, male at the time, and his response was, couldn't she have kept her legs together? Comments from a senior director to multiple young women at a Christmas party, using the phrase, when are you going back to your own country? Many inappropriate comments from the same senior director who happens to be the CEO's cousin and still works there now, part-time. Harassment at a different Christmas party by someone else, who had to be escorted out, but also still works there now. The CEO recently retired, and some very unpopular people were selected as the new senior management team, who treated a friend of mine appallingly when they left to join a competitor. People are leaving in droves, and many more looking for new jobs. And the worst thing about the whole story, the company has been nominated at a prestigious industry awards evening for Best Place to Work. It's completely baffling. Story 26, marketing agency based in the Southwest. Their recently sacked new business exec accused the company of bullying. Turns out that various members of staff were making jokes about his appearance on email. One of the jokes being that he looked like he had terminal cancer because he was bald. Court case came up, and the owner got the head of it to remove all email entries, which I'm 99.999% sure is illegal. 2. The design director of the business was a cokehead. He was caught doing a line on the work Christmas party with a new member of staff who didn't start at the company until a Monday after. 3. The owner would make constant problematic jokes about female members of staff. E.g., we had a dress up as another member of staff day, I know, and he dressed up as one of the girls. He commented that he only had to wear a cup because he looked at them. He also tried to explain where Glastonbury was to the new business exec because she was black and assumed she wasn't from the UK. 4. One of the digital designers was an alcoholic and would try to go out with every new female member of staff. This worked a few times, but as soon as the relationship would finish, he would try to get them sacked because he was drink pals with the account director. 5. The digital director of the business hated young members of staff and bullied them. He asked a staff member if he was happy now after he went off sick due to suffering from a depressive episode. He once called me to give me a row for something another colleague did from Europe. Proper piece of work. Piece of advice: if the company only has one HR member of staff and they are part-time, run for the ducking hills. Story 27. I worked at a company where the managing director was the most evil, spiteful person I've ever met. We had a young lad who had booked a surprise weekend away with his girlfriend and booked the Friday afternoon off. That Friday, there was a customer emergency, and he rightly said he couldn't go down to the site. The MD called me from his car on the M1, I was the manager, and told me to get everyone into the main office. People. I gathered them all and put the phone on speaker. I had no idea what he wanted. And he said, "I've told you all many times that my business is more important than any aspect of your lives, which are meaningless. Today, a customer has reported a problem, and Craig has refused to go on site this afternoon because he has booked a weekend away with his girlfriend and does not want to lose the money he paid. He clearly thinks his plans are more important than the customer and my business. They are not. Craig, as of this moment, you are sacked. Get out of the office," and hung up. Stunned silence. I was UTF. Have I gotten into here? I'd only been there a few weeks. I advised Craig about the law and told him to go on holiday and on Monday to see a lawyer and sue the arise of the company. Come Monday, I explained to the MD that he had probably broken the law. He was visibly angry at the suggestion, but he called his lawyer and I could tell the conversation was not going well for the GIT. The MD came off the call very subdued, called Craig, apologized, and asked him to come back, which he did against my advice. The GIT MD is now dead. Story 28. This was maybe 15 years ago now, but I was working Christmas Day, support worker for adults with additional needs, and I was 3 months pregnant. At exactly 12 p.m., I started bleeding heavily. I went to my supervisor and explained I needed to go to the hospital. I ended up lost a baby, and due to some complications, I had to stay in the hospital for a few days. The next year rolls around and we're discussing the Christmas rota. I was told that as I'd had the previous Christmas/New Year off, I'd be working that year. I pointed out that I hadn't taken time off. I'd come to work Christmas Day, worked 6 hours, then lost my baby. I'd not been out visiting family and having fun. There are so many more examples of toxicity from this workplace, but this really boiled my piss. Story 29. My boyfriend's, now husband, stepfather suddenly had a stroke, was hospitalized, diagnosed with cancer, and died within a few days. As soon as he became ill, I let my clinical director and head nurse know. I kept them up to date, told them if the worst did happen, I would be needed, as my boyfriend didn't drive, and I'd need to get him up to his mom, be around for support. I got a phone call at 4 a.m. from his mom saying, "He's gone. I don't know what to do. I can't drive. I'm at the hospital too shaken up." I offered to go down right away, but she wanted to sit with him a while. I was due in work at 7. I'm a vet. I turned up and told my manager and head nurse that he had died and I needed to help them, and they said, "We can't let you go. He isn't directly related to you and you have work to be getting on with." I was taken aback and said, "No, I'm sorry, that was a statement from me, not a question. I am leaving now." They tried to argue with me, but I just walked out. They made my life hell after that. I handed notice in soon after, and the manager immediately went down the back and slagged me off to all of the staff. She told me I hadn't made any friends there and was a crap person. She bullied me for a month before I was signed off with tendonitis in my foot. I started to get better and was so scared to go back I self-harmed to make my foot flare back up for the next 2 months so I didn't have to return. Story 30. During my old job, my dad left my mom for another woman. Obviously, this had a major impact on my mom's mental health. She didn't leave her bed for days, didn't speak, just sat there, staring into space with tears rolling down her face. My sister and I didn't want to leave her alone, so we took turns keeping her company and making sure she wasn't a danger to herself. When I called in sick for a family emergency, the manager not only made me tell her what the emergency was, after telling her it was a sensitive subject, but then followed up by saying, "Well, my husband might have cancer, but you don't see me taking time off." Karen, I had my own cancer scare and turned up to every shift. They're two different situations. Plus, you pay me minimum wage. Do you really think this job takes priority over my family? Story 31. I worked in a care home where the manager and assistant manager were recently and nastily divorced. Half the staff was on manager's side, half on assistant managers. I started about 3 months after the divorce because on my first day, my induction was done by the assistant manager. That was taken to mean I was on her side. Like, I had a choice. The next 6 months, we're awful. Half the team wouldn't even look at me. 2 of them even got into a full-on fistfight over something stupid like whose turn it was to empty the dryers. I really tried to get on with everyone because not my problem. I do not care if you're divorced. I just want to work and provide for my kid. My very last day, I was on shift with someone on the other side to me. I was helping a resident in the bathroom when he suddenly flipped, hit me in the ribs, and shivered me backwards. I fell and hit my head on the sink, hit my head. Bleeding, agony, screaming for help. This guy's still kicking me as I try to get out the room. Tina, opens the door, sees what's happening, says, "You'll have to wait. I've just made myself a cuppa," and walks off. I managed to get up. The cook actually came to help me, called me an ambulance. I went into the office and quit on the spot, told the manager why. She said, "Well, we don't want to wuss on the team anyway," and told me to wait outside in the rain for my ambulance. Good riddance to that place. Much happier in the NHS, which is something you don't hear often. Story 32. An old manager who has since been sacked once said, when speaking about a colleague who needed a day off to attend her grandmother's funeral, "It's only her Nan." To make it even worse, the colleague in question was part-time and the shift she would have needed covering was 4 hours long. The way this man spoke about it was as if she was asking for a month off to go on holiday or something. Story 33. Working under 0-hour contract at a Japanese fast food shop. It's been a roller coaster of a job. Starting with crazy manager, the shop would turn sour every time she had a bad day. Someone would get fired if they did something wrong on her bad days, hence our shop had a high worker turnover rate. If she doesn't like someone, she will make work very difficult for them, waiting until they snap so that she has a reason to fire them. She earned 15 an hour, but did absolute duck all. Yes, she worked, but not a lot. She didn't serve customers. She didn't help cleaning. She cooked a bit, but not always, and always cutting fish all day from 9 to 5 when that activity could be done in 1 to 2 hours. She lied about our shop's hygiene ratings, and so when she got fired, finally, we got blamed for the seemingly decreasing cleanliness, when in reality, it's always been 3-5 instead of 5-5. And we always did as we were taught and told. Turns out those ways, her ways, were wrong. She got her faces, and in her eyes, those 2 boys could do nothing wrong even though they'd caused diarrhea. They marinated chicken using cleaning gloves, so ducking yikes. She got fired when we exposed her lying about going on vacation when she was actually working somewhere else. She tried coming back to the shop at some point, trying to be a proper manager, to not get fired by HQ, but at the same time, wanting to fire people who talked crap about her behind her back, meaning those who reported her antics. Story 34. My dad had been put into a medically induced coma with COVID on the same ward that my godmother was on, also in a coma. I rang work asking for a bit of time off, and my manager and HR were absolutely fine about it. 2 hours later, the director decides to press ahead with my redundancy that I didn't realize was going on behind the scenes. Furlough was still a thing at this point, but it was never offered to me. Just straight up redundant. Myself and another girl from my team interviewed for a job in the sister company. I wasn't successful, which is fine, but knowing what I was going through, their reasons for rejection were office dynamics, and that my presentation wasn't as polished as hers, and that we both had the same amount of time. A week after my termination date, they listed a very similar job to mine in the same sister company and told me outright that even though I'd been made redundant from almost the same role, I wasn't entitled to this job because it was in a separate company. Legally fine. Morally, a bit of a kick in the teeth. 1 month later, the director asked me to work for him as a freelancer 4 days a week. Should have been under IR 35, but I was a stupid mug who was desperate just to pay the bills despite everything that was going on. I stuck it for a few months, but ultimately left because it was destroying me financially and mentally. Leaving that situation was the best thing I ever did for my mental health. I'm thriving now in a genuinely lovely team. Story 35. At a past job, the MD tried to get me to do crime with him. I worked as the ET manager, and he called me on a Saturday while I was doing my shopping. He asked if I could turn off the CCTV at one of our remote sites, because he was going in and didn't want to be on camera. I knew I couldn't give the logical response of, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that as it makes me an accessory to whatever you're doing, because he was a real and probably would have fired me on the spot. So I told him to give me 10 minutes to get home, and I'd call him back. In reality, I was just trying to come up with a reason not to do it that he would accept. I landed on, I can't do that remotely, so I'd need to come to site, and it's a 4-hour drive away. I knew he didn't have the patience to wait around for 4 hours, so he begrudgingly let it go. I later found out he'd been in and stolen thousands of pounds worth of a customer's stock. A customer that later went bust. Story 36. Worked customer service for a retail company. The period from Black Friday to Xmas was always completely manic, to the point where they'd rope in people who weren't usually employed to do customer service to answer emails, etc. As we were so snowed under, and there was a lot of pressure with our hourly quotas of how many queries we responded to were raised for that period. At one point, the company tried making a rule that if we wanted to get water during our shift, you could only fill a small glass as filling a bottle would take too long. So, as you can imagine, we were all working flat out, and it was a little stressful. Anyway, with all this going on, management decided to cheer us up by setting up a competition where we all needed to set up some sort of game at our desks for the head of department to tackle. It was strongly suggested that these should be drinking games. So he went desk to desk, getting steadily more drunk and raucous while we were trying to work. One of the challenges was a pizza eating competition, and he entertained himself by chucking half-eaten pizza at people who were sat at their desks trying to work. Another person got a glass of something poured over their head, and so on, until he was so drunk he had to be sent to a local hotel to sleep it off. At about 2 p.m. Story 37. Worked as a team leader and adept of a fairly large supermarket. Honestly, it was worse than secondary school. One girl just loved to crapster eavesdropping on other people's convos, and then repeating what she heard to other people, causing numerous arguments. Another guy wanted team leaders so badly, he would literally report anything he could on myself and the other team leaders. 5 minutes late back from break reported. Spending too long talking to a customer reported. Talking to another colleague when the dept was quiet and there was nothing to do reported. The other team leader moved to another dept to escape and someone else got promoted. Who was the boss's little minion? And who would report the pettiest things in the world? I booked a weekend off for my cousin's wedding that was approved. I was then told 2 weeks before that I had to cancel my holiday so this person could have the weekend off. I said no and had the weekend off. When I got back, got pulled into a disciplinary meeting because the person had dredged up something I had said about the company months ago when we become social media friends just after she joined the dept. And I knew it was her cause. He had her phone out in the meeting. At that point, I had another job and had signed the contract the Friday before. So I had major satisfaction giving my letter of resignation in that meeting. Story 38. We had an excellent apprentice who, after appearing more tired and stressed than usual, revealed that he had become a full-time career when his dad, who was a single parent for the apprentice's whole life, was involved in a serious accident and was left effectively comatose. The apprentice was still young, possibly still a teenager, and was left as the sole main carer for his dad and his 2 brothers out of the blue. After a fairly lengthy period of time, during which he was still excellent throughout his whole apprenticeship, his dad died at home and he phoned in to explain the situation. The on-duty manager at the time only responded with, "Right, yeah, well, unfortunately, life still goes on for other people," implying that the apprentice's dad's death was somehow rude for having a marginally negative impact on the manager, who would now have to ring around a few places and find a replacement for a couple of days, as well as for the business in general. Not once during the phone call did he extend his sympathies or condolences, and as far as I'm aware, the company never sent a card or message or anything, only us as fellow employees did. After the allotted time off had expired, the apprentice, who was excellent up until this point, probably the best of the bunch, phoned in to say he would actually be having some time signed off sick due to the understandable stress of the whole situation. As a result, his contract wasn't renewed and he was let go. Story 39. I worked for an aesthetic doctor as the clinic manager, and the whole 2 years I was there, it was toxic as hell. For example, halfway through my employment, the head doctor/owner stopped speaking to me. This went on for over a year. He then hired someone else as the general manager without telling me, and she became his voice. We never knew what time we would finish, as we had to wait until his last client was done. This could be anywhere between 6 p.m., 10 p.m. Mind you, my contract said 9 a.m., 6 p.m. He charged specific clients more money based on their ethnicity. He was all about the money, but never paid us on time. We literally had to chase him every single month. This list goes on, but the worst thing is, he's one of the top-rated doctors in the country and is regularly featured in high-end magazines' newspaper. If only they knew the truth. Story 40. Insane levels of micromanagement. They thought making tea and coffee was an excuse not to be doing your work. So we had a rota where you made it for the whole company, and everyone's drink had to be an exact specific shade that they liked. E.g., really dark tea for boss, really dark coffee for someone else, pale milky tea for another person. They went nuts if you forgot everyone's sugar sweetener preferences. They thought anything more than one toilet break a day was suspicious. You weren't allowed to go get your printing either for similar reasons. Printing was to be sorted by admin every hour into trays. They would stress the professionals out with this rule, because the professional staff wanted to get their own printing and leave, but the admins were meant to sort and distribute it, so no one took anyone else's printing by accident. It would have had to be done again if they left with it, costing the company money. They didn't like staff to talk to one another, but so they felt we knew each other. The office manager would make pronouncements about people while they were off on lunch, and we were all meant to agree. It felt like all these mad systems were in place to get back at staff they were pissed off with, and also so no one would ever supplant the office manager or overrule the company owner. I left really early into this job, but it was like I had ended up in a mad cult. Story 41. A few years ago, I'd been ill on and off for about 6 months, in a lot of pain, very poorly, back and forward at the doctors, and constantly misdiagnosed. The peak of it was when I collapsed in pain one day and woke up in my bathroom. The next day I noticed my skin eyes were yellow. Basically, I had a serious case of gallstones, which is what had been the problem for 6 months. And one of the stones had moved and got lodged in the tube, leading to my liver, which stopped it working, so I was essentially going into liver failure. I was admitted into hospital, had several emergency procedures, scans, etc., and finally properly diagnosed. When I phoned my work to let them know what was happening, the first thing my boss said to me was, and this is a direct quote, "Well, the biggest problem with that for me is I don't have anyone to cover your shifts for the next few days. Do you even realize how big of an inconvenience this is for the shop?" She then offered me 1 day off, and I was expected to be in the day after that. She had been this toxic and horrendous to work for years, so I knew what she was like, but that really was my breaking point with it. Thankfully, I work for a wonderful place now, who very much values their staff. Story 42. Mine was working for an agency. Worked long weeks of 5 8-hour shifts and 2 12-hour shifts Saturday and Sunday, then a day off. Well, it was supposed to be unless you got the 12-hour night shift 6 p.m. 6 a.m. Monday morning. They'd expect you in at either 2 p.m. or 10 p.m. that day. One weekend I'd just finished my 12-hour shift and I was knackered. One of the agency staff was there and stopped me leaving the floor I was working, asking where I was going. I said home. They said no. You're rostered in today for the 6 a.m. till 2 p.m. shift. I told them I couldn't do an 18-hour shift. The woman started screaming at me about how I had to do it. I said I couldn't, and they got right in my face screaming it was my job. So I looked her straight in the eye and shouted, "I've ducking quit, your stupid woman," and walked away. The agency indicator and asked what happened. Did I actually quit? I said yes and told them what happened. They were gutted. The good thing that came of it was the company I was hired by the agency to work for got in touch with me and offered me a full-time job because I was a good worker. 5 8-hour shifts with more money and days off, but I would never work for agency again. Story 43. I had a manager that transferred from a different store. She was hated by most of the staff at her old store, and she never had long-term staff, which was odd. When she came over here, it made sense. She would treat the staff lower down on the food chain like crap and only treated the management well. She'd put people in for shifts that were outside their availability that they'd agreed upon when they started and write them up if they couldn't make it. She put people down for holidays they didn't want to take to use them up when she wanted to, instead of when they wanted to. She also canceled booked holidays and put people in for shifts and gaslit them into thinking they were never supposed to be on holiday in the first place. I'd been there for 7 years, but I quit after just 3 months with her. I wasn't the only one. After I left, I heard about other staff that had been there for years quitting due to the way she treated them. It was an okay company to work for, but the managers are the ones that made it a good or bad job. She was good with stock and sales, but awful with people, so the company didn't really care about people not sticking around under her or about customer complaints. Story 44. Years ago when I worked in a pub, one of the other ladies' grandfathers had died after her shift. She phoned in to say she wouldn't be in the next day and was told to come in or don't bother coming back. She did come in, and the manager had told everyone that her grandfather had died, which isn't necessarily a massive deal, but wasn't her info to give out. Same place maybe a week later, I was on shift and someone had spilled something in the kitchen, no wet floor sign, and I slipped over while carrying a plate of food. Really hurt my ankle, twisted it, but managed to keep the place upright, apart from one roast potato. Manager walked over, took the place off me, picked up the dropped potato, blew on it, put it back on the plate, walked over me, and then went out to give it to the customer. Same place, first couple of days, someone purposely locked me in the walk-in freezer. I hadn't been shown where the button was to open it from the inside. It was only for maybe 10 seconds, but it was ducking terrifying. They hired 3 new members of staff at the same time, inked me, and all 3 of us quit after 3 weeks within days of each other. I was only 21, so was young and dumb, so didn't do anything about it. Story 45. I had a new manager come in to lead our sales team. On our first 1-2-1 meeting, her opening statement was, "You're a pompous git." She'd never met me before. She was apparently a qualified coach and insights practitioner. She then proceeded to try and make my life crap for the 2.5 years she was there, even through COVID. I was furloughed, as was most of the company, but she funneled all my residuals out to her favorite salesperson. She proceeded to try and cozy up to senior leaders and directors in the most obvious and embarrassing ways possible, and thought nothing of throwing her team under the bus. Her weekly sales report was called the crap list, and this would go up in board meetings with that title on it. I outlasted her in the end and took gratification in the fact that her self-organized going-away party was basically a meal for one, as she tried to compete with one of her fellow sales managers, who was also leaving. Naturally, everyone went to that event as we'd arranged it. Story 46. My friend and I were assaulted by a chef who worked with us, and after this, he verbally abused us at work for months. When I found out about my friend, we called the police and he was arrested because what he did to my friend was so heinous. The next day, I was working the breakfast shift, and bam, 9 a.m., he was there. The reason he wasn't suspended was because the media might find a story and some bullcrap. I documented everything he said to me for months, and when people noticed and they asked me about it, I was not allowed to speak about it in case there is a witch hunt and the place gets sued. He called me things like a stupid ducking Karen, silly escort, rotten hell on a daily basis, and they had no concerns for my safety. Eventually, they helped him leave and set him up in a nice restaurant position in his home country, good references, etc. After this all became local knowledge, around 7 girls approached me and told me similar. This was 2022, all the ducking chefs walking around saying, "The industry has changed since the old days. Are ducking delusional?" The man who assaulted me was also a man I used to joke with that he would be the best man at my wedding. Sickening story. 47. This is a bit of an anticlimax, but I know someone who had a disgusting supervisor who was a downright bully to everyone because they were just kids working at the typical fast food place at university. She has him in the office for a regular abuse session about how terrible he is and she should fire him, blah, blah, blah. But then she let the mask slip a bit too much and started calling him an idiot. My mate just grinned and said, "I take it this conversation is over?" "No, it's not over. You're getting a written warning and you're gonna stay here until I'm finished." Well, let's see what Dave, not the real name of the gay bloke who owned all of the franchises for this fast food place in the town, has to say about what you've just called me. You know it will all be on CCTV, don't you? Apparently, she absolutely crap herself and never said another word to him as long as he worked there. Story 48. Just before New Year's as a teenager, I was working as waitstaff in a restaurant. About 10 minutes before I get dropped off to work, we get the phone call saying my grandfather, who was in hospice with terminal cancer, was reaching the end and was not expected to live much longer than a day or two. We decided there and then that we would all get in the car and drive the 100 or so miles to the hospice to see him before he passed away. I called my bosses and explained that I wasn't going to be able to come in because my grandfather was about to die, and I apologized for leaving them short-staffed in the process. They say it's fine and hang up. About half an hour later, as we're driving over, I get a phone call from my manager who told me that given I had a couple of days off over Christmas, the restaurant was closed. And now I wasn't coming in today, my role was terminated, and I'd have to find employment elsewhere. I spent the rest of the journey absolutely gobsmacked. The owners were arseholes, but I didn't think they could be that heartless. My grandfather ended up living another 2 weeks, but I'm glad I got to say goodbye before he passed away. Story 49. About 7 years ago, I worked in spoons. My nan passed away after a long battle with dementia. She raised me along with my mom and was hugely important to me. I was begrudgingly given the day of the funeral off, but had to be back the following day for work. I lived 2 hours away, so couldn't even go home after and comfort my grieving mom. For a ducking Weatherspoon. I was young and foolish then and just took it. There's no way in hell I'd let that happen now. This is also about an old workplace, a GP surgery, and was after I'd left, but a friend that still worked there at the time, she handed her notice in after the incident, told me. A new staff member had started as a receptionist, which has a huge high staff turnover anyway. Can't possibly think why. 5 months, and her partner's cancer worsened, and she had to take time off to provide end-of-life care for him. He passed away and she was grieving, received a letter to say, "Sorry, you've not passed probation, don't come back to work." So was left jobless, dealing with the grief of her husband she'd just nursed in his dying days whilst living on SSP. The ultimate irony is that it's a doctor's surgery. Story 50. I used to work for Phones for You. It was a concession store run with minimal staff. I was the manager, I had one assistant manager, and 3 employees. The store was open between 8 to 8 Monday to Saturday and 10 for Sunday. If any staff members were off sick or on holiday, I would have to cover. Some months, I worked the full opening times by myself. On top of that, if the store did hit its sales numbers that day, you would get a phone call from your area manager on the way home to explain what went wrong or why you couldn't hit target, and you had to explain how you would do better tomorrow. The next morning, you would join a call with all other managers whose stores weren't hitting target to basically get a blocking and being told you need to hit target that week. It was a nightmare. I hated it. It was so illegal and verged on slavery without bonuses, etc. I initially started in sales and was the top performer in the region, then moved to assistant manager, and basically increased store profits by 50 over a year. With top performing sales and customer scores, I would have done any job just to get out of that place. Story 51. Working in a busy bar, had a pregnant team leader working with me. She'd been working on a slappy bar floor from spilled drinks, covered in receipt paper, and empty glass trays for about 3 hours when I got in, because my boss decided we had enough staff and didn't need to hire any more. It was her and one other member of staff for what should have been about 6 people behind that bar. I got there, they both needed to go to the toilet, so she got priority, covered her, then him, then tried to tidy up, but at the end of the night, she came to me in tears that it wasn't fair that she was expected to work like that, with all the slip, trip hazards, whilst also being about 7 months in. Sat with her, listened, chatted, and calmed her down before she volunteered to go back and carry on closing down. The next day, she went to my boss with the same grievance about the working conditions not being safe, and his response was, well, it was just a one-off, so it doesn't really matter. I ended up walking out and not going back because it did indeed happen again. Story 52. My best mate was in hospital, having end-of-life care for cancer. I was supposed to be minuting a meeting and explain to my boss. I was worried I wouldn't be able to concentrate well enough to take notes. She didn't offer any help, so I just cracked on with it. My friend died just after the meeting and I took the next day off, but got the draft of the minutes to my boss by lunchtime the day after that. So 48 hours after one of the most important people in my life for the last 30 years died. My boss replied asking me to change some bits and pieces, and that was it. No, hope you're okay. No, thanks for doing this in the circumstances. Nothing. Same boss told me 3 months later I needed to stop bringing my problems into the office. Like, sorry, I'm not a sociopath and I'm a bit sad right now, you heartless Karen. Story 53. In an old job, I had a very rough year. I lost 3 family members with very little warning within a few months of each other. One of these was my uncle, who I was incredibly close to. He stood up to go to the toilet one Sunday morning and collapsed, dead from a brain aneurysm. It broke me. I took a few days off initially to process the grief and then again for the funeral. I also took time off for the funerals for my other family members. The office was open plan, but had some floor-to-ceiling cabinets halfway down the office to create a barrier between the office end and the workshop end. One day, I was in the workshop end, working on something, and my boss walked in. He loudly asked where I was and sarcastically followed up with, "Who's passed now?" I silently walked around the corner, slammed my ID badge on my desk, picked up my bag, and walked out. I only went back after 2 days in a formal apology. Story 54. I used to work for a certain well-known and cheap pub chain. The kitchen manager, KM, had been telling our area manager, AM, for a year that the floor in the kitchen needed replacing as it was so worn down and old, it was dangerous. AM would always refuse. One day, the pub was audited, health and safety being a key area. The auditor was shocked at how bad the kitchen floor was and said it needed replacing immediately. The KM and AM were both present for the audit. The AM started telling off the KM in front of the auditor, asking why he hadn't asked to get the floor repaired, essentially lying to make himself look like he wasn't incompetent. Disgusting behavior. Unfortunately for him, the KM wasn't the sort to take crap, so he called out the AM, shown the emails where he had asked about the floor and where the AM refused, then immediately quit and walked out. M was nearly in tears. So funny and totally deserved, so at least there was a happy ending. Story 55. I lost my parents within 17 months of each other. Worked for a well-known convenience chain, being advertised with a guy on a donut suit ATM. After both their passings, I immediately submitted fit notes. When Mom eventually passed, and so soon after Dad, I was struggling. I went in one afternoon to see my manager and he insisted I should come back to work as we were short-staffed. I refused. Then payday came. I was paid a grand total of $35. The reason? HRSA on bereavement leave. But I have fit notes, so I should get sick pay. Took 2 months to get my wages sorted. After another year, I said damn it and quit. After 13 years, I got a dead bunch of flowers and a box of bath and shower stuff that I couldn't use because I have to skin conditions. Best thing I ever did. Unfortunately, due to ill health, which I blame a lot of on the company, I'm now medically retired. Story 56. There was a lot of crazy crap going on in the call center I worked in pre-COVID. I didn't hear about most of it as I just kept to myself mostly. But apparently a bunch of people had made a secret Zoom channel specifically to make fun of and bully one other person. This person eventually found out about it, and I guess all hell broke loose. It really was a bit like secondary school, except these were all grown-ass adults. Story 57. This happened shortly before I left, but I had a really bad back, like I could barely stand a shower, and then on top of that, because I was working so much and so hard, I had made myself sick. I had a shower, and when I got out, I was shivering. This was in August. My partner was so worried about me, he told me to just call in sick. I knew I would get in trouble, so he called in for me. The manager told him that they would have to take me off the rota for a few days. He said that's fine because he didn't think I should be working right now anyway. The next day, a supervisor, I was the assistant manager, messages me to ask if I'm coming in. I tell her exactly what happened the previous night so I won't be in. The manager had told her to ask if I was coming in and then started harassing me to come back. Story 58. I was 24 and female, working in finance in the NHS. My line manager was mid-30s, male, heavy smoker, and totally creeped me out. But the whole department thought the sun shined out. Even my female manager didn't think it was an issue when he gave me an explicit birthday card at work and would repeatedly rub my shoulders and neck when walking behind my desk, etc. Despite me repeatedly telling him I didn't like it, didn't want to be touched, and felt it was inappropriate. Tones of other issues around me, doing all of the team's work and half my hours, and him spending the whole time smoking and chatting to people and turning up late and leaving early. I was basically hounded out of the department and ended up in counseling and on anti-anxiety medication. The workplace freedom team also told me they would investigate, but ultimately came back saying they didn't have an issue with how it was handled. Story 59. I was a front-end team leader at Tesco and maybe 12 weeks pregnant. Early, I know that much. A checkout girl was also pregnant, but sadly she lost a baby. She obviously had some time off to recover and likely grieve. My manager, who knew I was pregnant, actually said out loud how pathetic it was, because it's not like it was an actual grown baby. I just remember looking at her and being like, did you actually just speak those words out loud? I didn't bother reporting it because it was overall just such a toxic environment no one would have taken notice. And I'd have been back on her radar for snide remarks about my performance, which she'd happily do in front of colleagues and customers alike. Every manager in that store was a bully and a pause, just so toxic. My current workplace isn't much better, but at least they have some empathy. Story 60. As a carer, the care home manager sent out a message to the effect of, I understand employees think it's okay to leave the premises on their lunch break. We have a perfectly acceptable staff room. Please stay here in case of emergency. We may need to call on you. We were not paid for lunch breaks. Get more staff if you're worried about understaffing, or at least word your notice as a plea rather than a demand. Story 61. There was an aspiring managers program that people could apply for and had to do a points-based interview to get a place. A girl on my team, who was generally nice and very good friends with our team manager, but pretty lazy, applied and subsequently found out she didn't get a place on it. She came back to our team after she found out and totally kicked off about it to our manager. Suddenly, the next day, she miraculously got told she had a place on the program meeting. That was the point I started looking for another job. It was so blatant that she didn't deserve the place, but had basically cried her way into getting it. And I didn't want to work for a company where that's how promotions worked. Story 62. My old boss in my current job was a complete bully. Reading the HR bully policy was literally just a checklist of all the crap he would do. He made several members of the team cry during meetings, was totally unprofessional on so many levels. I could tell many stories about his profound craftiness, but this one is always the worst. At the Christmas party, my first year there, he started telling wife-beating jokes, which, while crass and poor taste enough on their own, were compounded by the fact that he was sitting beside a member of the admin team who had had that day off because she had attended court to give evidence against her former partner who had been hitting her. I honestly remember just being completely speechless, and she just sat there with a stunned look on her face. Story 63. Someone that I worked with at a local authority was a full-bore evangelical, was banging on about what he believed for about 10 minutes. It was interesting enough to hear. They asked me what I believed, and I explained in a respectful way that I was an atheist. But I fundamentally believe in people's right to freedom of choice when it comes to religion. 2 weeks later, I was in a meeting with HR being given a written warning for discrimination. I had witnesses backing me up to say what I said wasn't in any way discrimination, but the warning stuck. I threatened to sue, but I was gone 3 months later. Before I left, I slowly replaced his expensive coffee with the cheapest stuff possible and took the post-it or label off his milk so other people used it. Story 64. One of the women at management level was shagging the married MD for years. His wife was up north whilst he had a flat in England for during the work week. She told all to someone when drunk once. You used to see him leave, then her car go the same way, when she was meant to turn the opposite, and one person always saw her car parked outside his flat most weeknights. I heard he wanted to finish it, but she was totally unstable. Whole thing caused noticeable favoritism and just general awkwardness in the workplace. The place had other toxic issues. Things like if you are 1 minute late, you have to make it up at the end. Family members working under their parents with lots of favoritism, bullying, and putting laxatives in people's coffees. I left as soon as I could. Story 65. A good friend of mine, rather than me, but management would take direct personal credit for anything their underlings did, to the point where the software engineers would go out of their way to write difficult-to-follow and obfuscated code to make sure nobody could maintain it but them, and nobody could, or possibly would want to, take credit for it. They were also just horrendous people who paid close attention when one of the staff was diagnosed as autistic, read up on how autistic people experience things, not so that they could make things easier for them, but so that they could make things harder because they thought it was funny. The bright side is that by the time they sacked my friend, half of their back end was running on files stored in his Google Drive, and when that got automatically deleted, everything broke. Story 66. My old boss threatened to fire me because I was having a panic attack. His exact words were, "Maybe you should take some time and think about your ability to keep working here." I was the only cleaner on student move-in day. I'd spent weeks running around desperately trying to get the place ready. 3 buildings, 1 cleaner. I have pretty bad social anxiety, possibly even anthropophobia. And there was a lot to do, and a lot of students and one-off staff suddenly in the buildings. There was a reason people kept leaving that place, and he was it. Forgot the bit where he was complaining about and considering firing one of the maintenance guys who was out of holiday days and would call in sick to take his dying wife to the hospital and spend their final moments together. Story 67. If you've ever traveled on the Caledonian Sleeper, I can absolutely guarantee you that most of the staff you will have encountered will hate their jobs and their colleagues. The wages being so insanely high are what keep people there. It's easily, and I don't say this lightly, the most toxic workplace I've ever experienced. The managers are awful people. I've seen a London-based manager call one of the Glasgow-based hosts a miserable cow with a slappable face. The managers will play staff off each other, hoping one will crack and spill secrets. They quite openly admit to helping their favorites succeed and sabotaging the ones they don't like. That entire company is a cesspit of snakes. As I've said, the money is so ducking good that people are willing to just deal with it. Story 68. Sat at my desk crying in pain because I had a kidney stone trying to pass. I'd even taken 100 milliliters of a tramadol, and it wasn't working. Did my manager let me leave so I could go home where I had more painkillers, or to AE so I could get morphine? No. She called my doctor's surgery, spoke to a nurse practitioner to see if they could do me a prescription for something stronger so I could stay at work. I work in a doctor's surgery. Ended up in an ambulance the next morning where I completely drained their onboard supply of gas and air for the short trip to AE, and the lovely paramedic told me the last time she'd seen anyone in that much pain was a man whose ankle was broken. Story 69. A colleague in writing via email said he was going to fight me after work because he was unhappy with a decision I made. I forward to HR we have a meeting, HR woman told me, in front of him that what we do outside of work is no interest to the company, and he had done nothing wrong. Also, not me, but same place, a colleague got glassed in front of 10 or so of his workmates in a pub after work by another colleague hounded him out instead of firing the guy that glassed him. Police didn't do much, as all 10 of them were looking the other way at the time, it seemed. Glad I don't work there anymore. Story 70. Many years back, I had a small head surgery, think 1 hour in surgery, that turned into a big emergency surgery, think 6-hour surgery, and thus required a longer healing time. I followed the procedures, got regular checkups with my DR, sent in my sick leave extensions. My bosses assured me everything was done by the book, and I would be okay. First day back, well, apparently I'd had multiple disciplinary meetings I'd failed to attend. They sent the meeting request to my work email, which I wasn't allowed to access outside of the building, and I was given my final warning. Then they held this over my head when I didn't want to do unpaid overtime, or tried to take my lunch break. I quit 2 months later. Where was the most toxic workplace where you ever worked at? Story 1. Awfully Chocolate when I was working PT during poly days. The boss and the supervisors, not store managers, were awful, and we are to have our photos taken daily at work, showing our makeup, hair, and attire. The notion that only pretty girls will be hired and allowed to work at AIC, and voice recording of how we would introduce and sell the cakes to customers. Girls who didn't have the right amount of makeup and neat hair will be openly mocked in the chat group and compared with other girls. They would come into store at any time, any day, to spot check on us too. One even tug on my shirt asking why I'm using the apron to cover up so much. Well, hello, the shirt is white and translucent. I'm supposed to show my bra to customers, is it? Of course I would cover up its basic decency. That being said, their chocolate desserts cakes are good though. Story 2. This ice cream shop that existed at Donkey years ago called Bilk. When the female boss was not in the shop, she will be watching the CCTV from home, eyeing our every movement. Every time I did something remotely wrong, like not crushing the cookies the way she liked, or giving too big a scoop, slightly bigger only, to customers, or she didn't like the way I wiped tables, she will call the shop phone to tell us off. It was like more than 10 calls per shift. Even watched me eat my lunchbox packed from home at the staff rest area through CCTV, and texted me dinner made with love. Is this not psychotic? I worked there, I think a grand total of less than 1 week. The last straw came when I fell sick one day, and it was about 2 to 3 hours before the time my shift started at 12 p.m. Texted boss to tell her that I was sick and unable to show up. She told me that I will need to pay the amount I was supposed to earn that day. This was not even mentioned to me during contract briefing. Was a 19-year-old clueless noob. I was super angry and refused to pay, and got into a quarrel with the female boss. End up, they didn't pay me for the days I worked earlier as well due to the quarrel. Well, they also only paid $5 an hour. That was 2013. I went on to do many more part-time jobs, some of which were outright exploitative, like being an IT show promoter and got 1 meal a day and had to sit on the floor to eat, etc. Now I'm a working adult with a full-time job, but I will say that no job I've done was as toxic as Bilk. My only regret was even taking that crap job in the first place. They were also super stingy, like charging customers 20 cents for water. Meanwhile, Utters further down Siglap had water cooler for free water. Male boss also got angry with me for ruining a waffle and causing it to stick to the waffle machine, and kept tisking while he was cleaning up. Disgusting place. Story 3. The very popular fake-ass Mexican chain. 1. They ostracized you when you're new and slow to the job. The manager and team leaders were power tripping, micromanaged everything you do. I was put online in a week and the manager started to berate how slow I was, or how I put slightly too much rice, and forced me to redo orders when lunch service was so rushed. It really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It was so humiliating as a newcomer, and gives more ammo to the manager to pick on me. 2. They'd sent girls to do rubbish run, and the rubbish were often so heavy they required 2 people to do. I remember how I got to do it frequently, and the load was beyond me. I had to even ask men who were passing by to help me, or else I could never throw that rubbish into the chute. 3. They laughed at people who do not fit a certain mold, like someone who is less social and outgoing. They'd laughed at this guy who was less social and at his speech and his antics, and subsequently picked on him. 4. Got told by one of the team leaders that I should be doing something in a most condescending tone. Subsequently, he'd picked on me constantly, just because he told me after that he thought that I looked 15. Makes it easier to bully me, huh? It was so disgusting. 5. The manager was a devil. She scolded someone, "You're my dog!" in front of everyone because the team lead was taking charge. And she didn't like that. She is also someone that spares no empathy to people. Just look at Glassdoor. The whole culture is rotten to the core. It was a nightmare to work there, and their motto. They pride themselves as family. Big duck you to the place and the ducking Karen-ass manager. Story 4. A local mid-sized architecture firm around 15 miles ago. It's mostly depending on your direct supervisor. The one I was working under was this psychopathic man from Penang with a penchant for watching adult film during working hours. Where do I begin? Terror-style management. When one team member made a mistake, the rest of the team members were summoned during lunchtime to watch the staff who made the mistake being scolded and insulted in front of everyone. 2. No respect for other people's time. He asked the newly joined staffs to come to work on Saturday to discuss the project, but he never showed up. Repeat every Saturday. The other instance, when we have a meeting with the client set on Thursday morning, all the drawings were completed by his staffs on Tuesday, but he only gave his feedback on Wednesday evening 9 p.m., making us to have no choice but to work late. Repeat twice, every week at least. 3. Using abusive and threatening language. He summoned us, the foreign workers under him, and asked us to write on the whiteboard how much money we were making back in our home country, and to make the comparison of how much money we are getting in Singapore. He pointed out that because of how much more we are getting in Singapore, we also must work much more. And he warned that the moment the company terminated our work permit, we would be sent back to our kampong within a week's time. He used the exact word kampong. That moment I realized that he is a nasty person. 4. Watching adult film during working hours. Enough said. Manipulated female staffs to accompany him for dinner at the local private club. 6. Forcing the staffs to not go home before he leaves office, which is around 1 a.m. every day. Story 5. First job, admin assistant. Lasted only a few months, already record-breaking since people usually quit after weeks. Boss was Indian PR, who was like a cartoon villain. Turns out he preferred Chinese girls because we are more obedient. He liked to show off his Hyundai car, umbrella, etc., as if it was really expensive. Why was he even bragging about these things to me, a lowly office girl? He is a boss. Of course he can afford these things. Anyway, certain people shouldn't be in positions of power. His company is only 4 people strong. And yet, he wanted to instigate competition between the 2 office girls to get more bang for his buck. Right. Also, he shouted at me with his very loud voice twice on the day he sacked me. Never felt more liberated being out of that place. Second job, volume licensing administrator. Was terrible because of tight deadlines, strict quota, and never-ending stream of work. Very strict grading system for your work. And the slightest mistakes will accumulate, giving you bad performance at the end of the month. Had to ballot for leave, and also once the seniors don't think highly of you, you'll be the black sheep of the department. Everyone was just stressed out and out for themselves. It wasn't good for mental health no matter how much the pay was. Once I was at a loss how to produce my work, and everyone was way too busy tired to provide help with your case. Happiness is an important factor in a job. Once you find yourself in depression, constant emotional breakdown, it's time to go. It's not worth the emotional damage. Story 6. I've had a few. A music school music instrument co. What I heard. They confiscate foreign workers' passport. The HR reject a staff's hospital MC and insist she remove her bandage to show HR the wound to have her MC accepted. They accidentally sold away a customer's electric piano sent in for repair, so they just lied and said it can't be repaired and talked the customer into buying a new one. What happened to me? I applied for leave 6 months in advance. My RO had a bad habit of not approving people's leave until the last minute. I asked her, she verbally said okay, and I booked my tickets. Actual date came, she didn't allow me to go. I went anyway and got fired, and they said I was AWOL, and I had to compensate them money. Instead, a company that used to franchise Suddenly Slender Spa. Delay salary until 12th of the month, not allowed under mom. And die must 3 p.m. Then can give all because of superstitions, auspicious hour. Secretly didn't pay our CPF for months. Those who wasn't paying any monthly HDB loan didn't realize until someone brought it up. Chased for months before they eventually paid up. They also canceled work permit of a Malaysian staff on notice without telling her, causing her to be stuck at customs. Lastly, a motivation speaker investment guru company. Very toxic positivity. If they ask you to do something unrealistic, you can't negotiate. You can't say no, you can't give alternatives. You can only do because once you say that's not possible, they say you're negative. Work late nights, work weekends, and there's no rest at all. And when mental health takes a toll, you're just being negative. Story 7. US MNC handling mobile insurance. By far the worst workplace I've been hired for. Director expects very high expectations, which could be a pro that if you like challenges. But gotta be realistic. If you're able to meet his expectations, you really shouldn't be working for him. Expects employees to stay in office till late. Best is if after he leaves. But doesn't make sense because he comes in noon. Leaving on time is a no-no. And everyone will gossip about you because of that. Taking MC is also looked down on, even if you're very sick. Scheduled many meetings, some of which are conducive. But usually it drags for more than an hour when it could have been done through emails. It lessens our time to do operational work or important stuff that are nearing his deadline. Colleagues are 90% foreigners, so they usually speak in their own language or dialects. Difficult to mingle around as they have their defenses up, afraid you might steal their jobs. They have all been brainwashed by director that the later you leave, the more hard worker you are. Amazed by how he managed to brainwash them, considering youngsters of our time should have their own opinions and open-minded. But perhaps they're foreigners. This job matters a lot more to them. Manager didn't want to let go some of her scope because she's afraid of losing her food bowl. Very reluctant to teach and train. Training times, she will give blackface or bad attitude. The overall culture and mentality is so toxic, even though it's a US MNC, but it has the same kind of culture. I believe some same have better overalls than this. Story 8. My last job, definitely. It was at one of the huge departmental stores here. Working in retail is one of the most unrewarding experiences ever. The shift work, the long hours, working over all PHS and weekends, it was tiring. Every single day, I had to deal with countless Karens and Kens demanding for refunds, yelling to see the manager, the director, the CEO, etc., threatening to call the police, threatening to post about me on social media. They'd literally scream at you, hurl vulgarities, and you have to smile and apologies when you did absolutely nothing wrong. Cause of dispute? All because the cashier didn't smile or greet, they didn't get the discount they wanted, they couldn't find the size of the shirt they wanted, or they couldn't remember their Apple ID password, and somehow it's my fault that I didn't know what it was. Oh, the list goes on and on. On top of that, I had a micromanaging superior who treated me as his personal assistant. I had to be at his beck and call and do his work for him while he took all the credit for it, asking me to hide it from the upper management, and then berating me for not putting in effort when I stayed up for nights to do his job. He would always change things at the very last minute, communicate different expectations or plans to different people concurrently. It was the worst. Needless to say, this had took such toll on my mental state, and I'm glad to say that I've left. Story 9. One of the public hospitals in Singapore as a nurse. Staff would gossip all the time, and this is encouraged by the nurse manager who frequently goads staff into giving her feedback about others. Basically just an excuse for backstabbing and gossip. Those that do not do so are marked as being too quiet and lack communication. Whenever mistakes are made, manager would make a public announcement at the start of every shift to detail the error for 2 weeks straight, and will demand the person who made the error to present their mistake either by PowerPoint or verbally to the entire ward for learning purposes. These errors would be casually brought up repeatedly by the NM for no reason during chance interaction. Whenever a request for off day is made, e.g., if I need an off day on Saturday, staff would be scheduled night shift the night before. Night shift ends on Sat morning. Sometimes we are really busy and have no time for breaks and have to go home late after our shift ended. But manager would tell us that we have to go for our break no matter what, which is realistically not possible sometimes. She then blames that on poor time management. Story 10. Full House Home Furnishings. It's an SME, and the CEO spends money sending managers for self-discovery courses instead of upskilling. The warehouse is managed by a loyal Bangla employee who's been there for 15 years. So the CEO made him operations hot, and he's a freaking yes man who never learned how to do things digitally. The lack of digitalizing data shocked me. The entire warehouse is run by another Banglas, and nobody knows how to use a computer. Everything was still manually done. Warehouse has no racking and no way of knowing inventory without physically looking for it. Sales records were still hard copies of order chits filed in the main office. CS have to answer almost everyday complaints about why delivery schedules are never accurate. CEO expanded stores fast, but not the operations team. 10 stores and operations team remain the same as when they had 5. How to keep up? Lady boss sometimes visits office and catches people who manage to finish their work on time, then guilt trips them. She is also the super spreader of office drama. Being a retail store, there's holiday peak season, and office phones can be ringing all day long. Other departments like marketing have to step in to help answer cause we should help one another as a family. I left with 1 day notice on the last day of my probation period. Story 11. Carrefour at Plaza Singapura. The managers and superior are from Malaysia, India, and my manager is from Malaysia. Those who have worked at Carrefour PD/FT would know a few managers. Mine is the Malaysian guy. Not that tall, but he can awful if you don't do the job well. I quit it about in a month and I fell sick on Christmas Day. Messaged my manager and my senior, as a backup, that I fell sick and needed to see the doctor. For context, on that day my rookies will be on shift with 1 senior and 1 manager for that day. My manager called me up saying to come to work, and I said to him, I had a high fever. I ended the call and just proceeded to see the doctor. I came back work after Christmas and I applied to resign via HR, said to work a few days more to complete that 1-month period. My manager then went on to snide on me, saying things like, I can wake up at 4:30 a.m. to go work and can still reach early, mind you, he stay in Malaysia. Then he accused me being lazy with my senior beside me, same race as me. My senior just say to don't react at whatever the manager say since I will be leaving in a few days. On the last day, I ignored the manager the whole day and the next day gave back the uniform to the HR. Story 12. Electronics. Management is borderline psycho, throws tons of crap to interns and newly onboarded staff, while they keep themselves busy on micromanaging. Micromanage meaning no guidance on work. Sets aside a crazy KPI that only 5 can hit. Those unable to hit is forced to come back on weekend. Interns who did not want to risk getting their weekly report written in a bad light. 90% of work in a department, day ops, is run by interns, contract staff. Supervisors were on 2-3 HR smoke, HR lunch breaks while they restrict the rest to 45 mins. Those idiots had the audacity to shout at us because we were 5 mins late back to the office. Also witnessed one of the supervisors deliberately scold and make fun of a disabled intern at that time, while other management staff just stood by and even laughed. Makes me sick to the stomach to this day. Story 13. Worked at a MNC somewhere, where the company is not doing really well, and there are only a few of us left. My 2 colleagues at that time were already thinking of leaving, and then my boss also told me he might be fired. Then all of them accused me of telling the other party of their eventual departure. Damn you all. Want to add another story? Because I'm now all angry thinking about it. Same company, my mother got really sick and needed to go to the hospital. I fell sick at the same time, not as bad, but with a fever and all. Took 2 days sick leave to not only send my mom to the hospital, but also get some rest myself. Came back to the office 2 days later, and the project manager was all passive-aggressive with me and told me not to take so many sick leaves with that tone of hers that implies I'm faking it. Damn you as well. Story 14. Kids art school at mall. I worked as a part-time assistant teacher there. Basically, I'm a cleaner. Help clean the art materials and wait for the kids outside the toilet when they need to go. Each session about 2 to 3 hours. Initially took the job because I liked art and wanted to be in an art environment. Schedule is based on emails. Means they will send us an email 1 week before to remind us of our workday. Did well, had no problems for a few weeks. Suddenly, one day the head teacher kicked me out of the WhatsApp group. No explanations. Confronted the head teacher telling her she is damn unprofessional to just kick people out like that without an explanation. Imagine losing a job in that way. Her reason was I didn't turn up for a sesh. There was literally no email for that sesh. But she didn't want to hear me out, probcause. If she was wrong, she wouldn't want to apologize anyway. Also, I never received my pay, but I knew I was worth more than that job. My finances are secured with my full-time job, so I didn't even bother with the payment. The teachers there also had fake smiles, like they hate their jobs. Turnover rate quite high too. Story 15. Cake shop. High turnover rate, fueled by mentally exhausting bosses. Longest working employee at one point of time only worked a little less than 6 months. Demanding bosses who change their minds once every few days to a week to say A, free, say B. Frustrating when you're the one implementing all their decisions. Doesn't help when they only report for work 1-2 times a week. Understaffed AF, 4-person's office turned into 2-person's job. Low pay, expected to be on call even after your working hours. Very stingy with money, expects you to figure out work issues outside of your job scope. If they mess up, it's up to you to clean up. No balls to face clients when things go wrong. It's up to you to make it up to clients. Products are overpriced with a lot of marketing. You're better off buying elsewhere. Bosses sucking up to new kitchen management staff with decades of experience, but lacks work ethics and isn't really good at his job. Story 16. Event companies where you are worked to the bone but get paid little for the amount of things you do. Bigger companies actually pay the staff really little. I saw such companies offering $20,200 for full-time events exec. Did my internship at one, managed 2 projects. This company is like some recycling bin for interns who failed all the interviews and selection actually. First team was so-so. They graded me really low for my appraisal, even though I did a lot of work for them. This got me ostracized by my then internship lecturer in charge, and it wasn't fun. Second team was fun, met my best friend there. We were mostly outdoors, so it was really the experience. The higher-ups were really obnoxious, which made it not so fun. I tried to apply for the company again when they went to Simji for a career fair. When we tried to approach them, they gave us a really disgusted look. After we left, my friend was lamenting at how rude they were. They didn't approach much students and just had the whole "I don't even want to be here" vibe. Story 17. Bite dance. My wife's friend works there. The friend is in HR. Here are some stuff from her. Loads of busy work. Pay is stagnant. Promotions are rare. People get shifted laterally around teams for exposure, not growth. 3. Referring to point 2. Your starting pay is most important. Be sure to negotiate better on it so you don't get shortchanged. 4. If you are in software development, be prepared to see comments written in Chinese. Lots of presentations to Chinese teams in China. You can present in English, but if you can speak Mandarin, you can get your points across easier. 6. Lots of messages from people, lots of stakeholders checking on you. Some are legit, but most aren't. So you end up managing upwards most of the time. 7. Trust and safety to be avoided at all costs. Demotivated people who are just so escorts dealing with issues every day. 8. One particular race preferred here. See point. Story 18. First and second full-time job, graphic designer, then product tester. The following made the workplace toxic. Very unreasonable deadlines. Yes man who agree without assessing the contents of the tasks. Being shouted and humiliated at even minor things. This eventually made me panic and made more mistakes easily. Giving life lessons when they are out of touch with reality. Setting rules that they themselves don't follow. First company closed for good. LinkedIn and website gone too, maybe due to COVID. Second company still around, but the department that I was in closed. Story 19. I've worked full-time in one of the polytechnics. The contract was one of the worst I've seen in government sector. Fixed-term contract without increment, mid-year bonus, annual bonus, or any form of bonus. When I entered, 70% of my colleagues are aged 55 and above, hence throwing you all of their work. They're allowed to work from home 50% of the time, but you are not allowed UTF. The senior managers in my department basically throw all the work down. And on the days they work in office, they arrive at 10 a.m. and proceed to the canteen for breakfast till 11 a.m. After 1 hour of chatting in the office, it's a 2-hour lunch break till 2 p.m. followed by a tea break at 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. The car park will be empty by 5 p.m. Left that job within 6 months. Story 20. SME accounting audit firm. Boss only hires intern to run the place. Would get shouted and insulted at every day. Been called stupid more times during my 1 month there than my entire life combined. Did cry while getting scolded before. Always insulted me being a private student and loves making jokes, remarks. Workload was insane too. He tried to be nice through treating employees lunch, supper, if OT, but the conversations during meal times was disgusting. Talk about sex, etc. I rage quit and told him how disgusting his remarks were and his anger issues. Shortly after, apparently mom had an investigation with the firm and he had to hire a lawyer intern to fight his lawsuit. He told my ex-colleague that it was me, but nope, he insulted way too many employees. Could have been literally anyone.